Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Welcome back to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and I am excited today to be joined with my friend Randy Nickel, and we have a very special interview with somebody whose life has been changed by the good news of Jesus Christ. His name is Sundeep. He's a great friend of Randy, so I'm actually going to let Randy help with the interview, and we're going to hear how Jesus has worked in his family and brought him to a place where he is a committed follower of Jesus. So thank you both for joining us. And Randy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Greg. It really is a privilege and an honor to share with you today. I am really looking forward to introducing my friend. I had an opportunity. I was involved in a ministry in the United Kingdom in Scotland for 9 years. And my job was to help train people and equip people to share the gospel with high school students, with adolescents. And so I was meeting with people all over Scotland and trying to help people to get involved in this ministry. And one of the persons I met along the way, it's a series of events, but I met this guy named Sundeep. Now, if you would have told me an American would meet a brother in Christ from India in Scotland, and that Sundeep and I would become great friends, I might not have believed you, but that's exactly what happened. And so when I would travel all over the country, I made his home my headquarters. And so his kids kind of became my family away from home. His kids, when I see them, it's just like a reunion. I love his family to death. And I tease him pretty hard, actually, sometimes. And we're good friends. It's so funny because we don't always agree on everything. We don't always like the same things, but we really enjoy being together. So, Sundeep, it's great to have you. Why don't you start off by just giving us a little introduction about yourself?
Thanks, Randy. I was trying to meet this interesting guy as well. I don't know who he is. I'm Sundeep. I'm originally from India. I live in Scotland now, and this year will be my 30 years in this country. Married, my wife. You met my wife, and got 5 kids, 2 grandchildren. I'm an architect to trade. I came to Scotland to study architecture. I'd lived and work. I still do architecture, still design stuff, and but also involved in a coffee shop business and ministry. And I think I'm now grey enough to be invited into various boards and charities and etc. But also I'm sort of strongly linked to my parents' charity in India. My parents who both passed away now, but my sister runs a medical charity working with leprosy and eye care, which is in central India outside a city called Hyderabad. Hyderabad is probably where most of your credit cards are being processed and where most of your cold calls and your scammers are probably coming from, that you guys are interacting with. So yeah, big electronic city in the center of India.
Well, Sundeep, so you grew up in a town outside of Hyderabad. That's where your family's from. I've heard these stories many times, so I can tell them if I need to. But Sundeep, tell us a little story about how your family came to know about Christ.
Well, my great grandfather was actually the first convert in late 1800s, and he was a convert to German missionaries actually. who came to the part of India we were from, which is Karnataka state, which is one of the southern states. And the Germans were an interesting bunch of missionaries. There's, if I get a chance at some point, there's a great backstory about them coming to India as well. But they had very little resources. They weren't like the established European churches, in terms of the British church or the Catholic church that was in India. They were much more frugal, much smaller, much more limited. And so their approach really was, they came into quite small areas, sort of areas that no one else was interested in. The Brits sort of weren't sort of doing any work in some of these areas, and small fishing areas. And they learned the language, and being German, they established their approach was not to build the traditional hospital and school, which used to be the missionary model. They built a tile factory and a printing press, being Germans, and they just understood industry. And well, that was actually when I realized that my own DNA and my interest in business and kingdom, I realized it comes from that space of realizing how important the secular space is to kingdom growth, and but also just how so much of missional work is contained by financial restraints. You're essentially having to borrow money or depend on charity to come and establish whatever kingdom model, whereas they just set up the factories. Those factories created income, but also they created work for the local population. And what that meant is, in that workspace, when people saw the benefit and the ethics basically of the mission, of how they were treated, how they worked, what income they were given, it crushed slavery and indentured labor. All these people who were tied to land and fields because of their poverty suddenly were working, and because of that they then wanted to educate the children. So the schools were built afterwards for a community that actually wanted it for their children. And my great grandfather was a scholar, a Hindu scholar, and a doctor, an Ayurvedic doctor, and he was fascinated by the power that these missionaries displayed. When they were seeing, healing and seeing transformation, and he in secret began to meet the missionary to find out how he controlled this power. He's like, I've read this in the scriptures, I've seen this sort of. So my great grandfather kept meeting the missionary in public, in private, trying to discover it, and that's when he began to, because he was quite a well-known man, he couldn't be seen. So it was like that Nicodemus sort of space, to go in the background, meet the missionary, come to faith, and that's where he came to faith. And he was thrown out of his family, and he was, they tried to kill him, and he came away and over his lifetime established sort of 6 churches, transformed his family, and that was the sort of root of my background of being. We were Christian and we grew up, and so the time my father was born, my father was very passionate. He had a passion about Indians telling Indians about Christ. He said, if people have traveled 6,000 miles to tell me about Christ, where is the brown man telling the other brown man about Christ? And he wanted to go to Nepal, and eventually someone said, go to this small part of India. It was quite a backward, very arid, famine-related part of the world. And so him and my mother set up a hospital there, and very immediately realized leprosy was the key issue needed to be dealt with, and that's what they got involved in. And I love how at that time, people just became doctors and then became specialists. Later on in life, the need was now we come out specialists and try to already work out what we're going to offer the world. And I think there's a similarity sometimes in churches, like where we preset the agenda of what we think we're offering people, and where it's actually to grow. And leprosy was a thing, and they grew into that. And from leprosy, one of the other big things was eye blindness. A lot of So,
Sundeep,
you want-
so you're telling, I love the story, but your parents now have, I think, is it 2 leper colonies that they supervise? And how many clinics?
well, so there's 3 centers. So there's the base hospital, which is like a 50-bedded hospital. Then there's the leprosy center, which really was sort of there was a small hospital. There's like 50 families that used to be there, but also so that's one. And then we had a rural hospital, which also was like a 20-bedded rural hospital, which is about 15 kilometers away. And part of the history of these 3 sites was the leprosy colony. The government wanted to bulldoze a site where the lepers were squatting. They wanted it for a fire station or something. So they said, oh, well, you're a doctor who's been talking about lepers here. Why don't you look after them? You know, and they gave them a piece of land about 15 miles away from the main town. But we didn't want to make it a ghetto, really, you know, that this would be the leper colony. It became a rehabilitation center. And the beauty of the center was leprosy is not just it's not a physical disease or a medical disease. It's a social disease. It's a classic disease of ostracization of the other, the people who have no space in society. And because it's leprosy, it takes people from all sorts of society. You know, so it isn't, and suddenly this collective became this microcosm of India, where actually you had better harmony in this group of people because of their disease than you would see in other parts of India with healthy people because of different religions and castes and stuff. So so that was the sort of background. Now, 40 years later, the you know, most of the first generation leprosy has died down. It's come off the WHO target list. It's not as prevalent in India. India is still one of the highest countries of occurrence in leprosy. And a little just fact about leprosy is that it only affects about 30% of people anyway. Like you and I may not even if we were in contact with a leper, get leprosy from them. Where naturally most of us are immune, but it does live in sort of conditions, you know, that are prevalent, damp and dark and all that sort of condition. It's like the TB bacteria, so that's why it goes into very specific poor communities. But I'll share the story because I think this trajectory forms part of my old theology and missionology. Is there was a point when my father was this miracle drug came out with a guy called Paul Brand, who was an amazing doctor, did pretty much most of the leprosy research in India. Philip Yancey talks about him, interviewing him, and Paul Brand was an American doctor, and he invented this multi-drug therapy. It was called a concoction of drugs that hit leprosy, and for the first time in humanity, you had a curable leprosy, you know, and then they also did a lot of reconstruction surgery and stuff. And my father was taught under Paul Brand, and I was inspired by that. Now, my father was then giving out these drugs to people, and he came across a man who one day refused the drug. He says, I don't want your medicine. And my father was like, what do you mean? This is going to cure you, you know? And he's like, well, okay, this may cure me, and in 6 months I'm healed, but I still have my deformities, and I'm still stuck in this culture. What he says, I can actually earn more going around the country begging and having an income off the disease. You take that disease off me, I've got nothing left. You've actually, and that really struck my dad. He's like, well, what is it I'm trying to do here? You know, to be this sort of savior complex with this magic pill, or is there something deeper and richer we have to do with this? And that really is the longer journey in healing and restoration, you know, where the physical can be healed quickly, but it's the relational, the emotional, social that take generations. You know, it took. We now have the grandchildren of those first generation, and they are now our technicians and nurses and are you know, getting married. We one of our first generation leopards just died. Leopards patients just died last week, actually. Very, very sad, and very sad story in that she came from a wealthy family, and then in the 80s she got leprosy, and they kicked her out of the house. And so this was a high, sort of an educated, middle class, maybe quite well-to-do farming community, and suddenly she had nothing. And I remember the day when I was a kid at the time, but my father gets a call saying this lady's going to come in, and he's like, okay. And they dropped her. The family dropped her at the end of our street. Not even near. They wouldn't even come near the hospital, and they left her and her at that time 3-year-old girl baby, a daughter, at the end of the street. And my father had to go out and bring this family, and she was traumatized. Never spoke. Never was a recluse most of her life, and at a little, there's a beautiful, I can send you this show notes here. I can send you a link to a video we did of her story. And the beautiful thing is her daughter now is one of our nurses, is our lab technician, has grandchildren, etc. And she lived and was happy because of this. We were watching her daughter have a life, but she was never ever accepted back into the community. It was their family would be cursed by this disease, and no one wanted to know that there was this disease in this family. And that's the sort of social pain that people are living in. And so when I think of my missionology or my theology now, it's about we're quite good at the magic pill Jesus, we love that we can heal or burn or turn, or here Jesus will solve everything. We love that space, but we're uncomfortable with the longer journey. We're uncomfortable with the digging deeper into people's lives and what is it, even if they come to, we just want, I'm not saying we as in we all do this, but it's easy to come into a space where we just want the numbers,
right? Right.
Attendance, baptism.
It's messy. Ministry is messy. It's never simple like that. Sundeep, you just shared a lot about your family and the background, so it should be no surprise, but for you, in many ways, your business is your mission. And that's kind of been your vision all along, is that you want to impact people really through the business that you have. And so I guess I wanted to ask a couple of questions, but tell us why you chose a coffee shop as a place for ministry. It is a business, but it's a ministry. And also, you have compared that before to what it would be like to build a coffee shop to building a church. And can you share that with us?
Yeah, I'll probably bore you with this, Randy, because you've heard it so many times, but this is my core passion. That I grew up in a charity, and I grew up in that missional space. And I'm in our church culture, the minister who's gone to Papua New Guinea as a missionary gets the plaque on the wall. They're like the high hegians of our missional world. We love those guys, and I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not belittling those people, but I think because of that, we ignore all the menial saints who do amazing work in our communities and cultures. And I think I've just come from a space where I've seen the other side. And my father used to say that most charities are just one beggar giving another beggar someone else's money. And we get into this dependency culture, and that finance and the raising of finance dictates so much of what becomes missional activity, and it limits that. And that's something I've always wrestled with. I'm like, how? And because we lived in it, and in India, we right now we have a Hindu government which is being fairly aggressive against Christians and minorities, and but as much as it is doing that, I think we're at fault as well, because we didn't sustain and create a sustainable missionality. So a subtle tax law can cripple most Christian organizations because they're dependent on foreign funding. And so this is one of my big things. So when I come over to the UK, I realized it was still the same problem, even in a wealthy country. that the minute you start mission or talk about Christian or kingdom or gospel, you go and set up a charity. It's like our muscle memory kicks in, you know. And I'm like, that's okay. That's good. And there's good sort of financial reasons why we should do it. But is that the only way to do mission? And I began, you know, there were two things. One is that you then create a church institution that is highly dependent, needs people to be attending, because our only matrix of success is growth and baptisms and pew filling or whatever. You know, that there's certain sort of criteria of success. We have no way of defining salt and light. We've lost so many of some of our ancient ways. You know, the Scotland, the Celtic way. You know, the sort of monastic Jesuit way of sort of entering a pagan land and simply creating a small commune that serves the community. You know, it can do what it wants to do in its own holy, how it feeds itself, but its ultimate expression is to serve that community, to go and plow a field and lambs or be of use to that community. We've sort of just lost that. And now we're sort of on the other flip side of it, where we've been in power and now we're lamenting our loss of power. We're lamenting that the laws are changing and the land is changing and culture is changing. And we're back to woe is me. And whereas I'm like, actually, maybe God's putting us in exile intentionally so that we can just come back to him and rely on him. And so when it come back to coffee, we were seeing some great stuff going out in churches, in our church with the youth work, and we focused on discipling and spending more time with fewer people, and blurring the sort of sacred and secular spaces, you know, making things or everything sacred, not creating the sort of, this is my church space and this is my non-church space. And the kids actually were getting it. They were experiencing an Acts 2 church probably better than most adults had, in terms of being able to share and confess and be together and grow in a much more egalitarian model of church. And we're saying this is great. But then when you looked ahead of the trajectory, it was quite scary, because actually, and you've heard me say this, that I worked out there's about 37 roles we have in the church, from bass player to flower arranger to, you know, greeter and steward to pastor and whatever, secretary and then the building committee person, whatever. We have like these 30 odd roles, and I love to do, if anyone's listened, to do an exercise of what roles you have in church, maybe to add to this number and see how many you come up with. But when I looked at it, I realized that actually, if you didn't want to do one of those roles, essentially there was no place for you in the kingdom. It was sort of saying, like, if you didn't want to serve soup or be part of the nursery or creche or whatever, or youth work or youth band, whatever, we just weren't creating space for the others. and so as we looked at that problem, we're saying, actually, how do we create then this sacred space in secular environments that allow people to essentially realize they can do anything for Christ? And it has value and it has meaning, because if you're in a deep relationship with God, whatever he asks you to do is sacred. And I just don't think we have that sort of theology, or rather we don't celebrate that part of theology to allow that space. And so we had to create the precedent. So we, you know, as much as we end up with coffee, it was more to do with, we prayed and prayed and prayed, saying, how do we create a service space in a community? And we looked at landscaping companies, we looked at car washes, we looked at, I've even got an idea for a dating website, you know, or dating, you know, we just looked at anything that would be of service. Like, how do you serve the community? How do you go back to a monastic space to say, what do you want us to do? And we'll do it, and do it well. And in that, we also had to do it as a business, because we wanted not to be dependent on other people's charity. We wanted to say that if it's blessed by God, then that's all that is needed to do what we wanted to do. And also it doesn't distract us from all the fundraising time we have to do to do it, and also be limited by what that meant, like whatever fund came in is what you used. And I'm like, and I maybe I come across a little critical of the church and institution model, and I maybe am, but I think my only justification is that I'm not condemning it. I'm just saying the current way we do things is limited, and we have to broaden the tent here and give people tools and space in their hands to do it. So that's where we ended at coffee, and specifically coffee. I'll close it and you can think of other questions. As an architect, I've built about 8 or 9 churches in my life, and in Scotland, these are slightly old numbers, but a new church, a mega church in this country is about 400 people. It's not the 4,000 here in the States, so it's about 400 people as a mega church here. And to build a church for 400 people, you need about 1,000 square meters of footprint, which is what 9,000 square feet. And to do that was going to cost you about £2.5 million. And now it's probably much more, maybe about £4 million to do it, to just build a building for those people. And that building will, if it's really good and successful, needs pastor, even if it needs an infrastructure of running of about £100,000 in sterling to run a year, at least. It's more about nearly 200,000. Actually, it's about 180 you'd need to run that. It's food, bills, pasta, programs, the whole lot. And you're serving 400 people, 2 services, maybe a third service midweek, maybe 1,200, 1,500 people a week are being looked after or nourished in this vehicle that we've created, or this institute we've created. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot of institution, that 2.5 million up front, and then another rolling 100 or 200,000 a year to keep it running. And I'm saying that our objective is then to engage with people and interact and give people the gospel. I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's the model we've come up with. Now, in this country, you have a Costa, which is the big coffee chain. It's bigger than Starbucks in this country. A Costa franchise is about 750,000. 250,000 sterling, and an average Costa looks after about 3,000 people a week in servicing their needs. And I'm like, well, you take, say, the same 2.5 million and you get 10 Costas, you're looking at 30,000 people that you get to interact with in a week. And even if you took half that money and took half the franchises and use the rest to engage with someone to work in it, you're still engaging with 15 or 20,000 people. And I'm like, it's just as a mathematical exercise. I'm like, why are we stuck in this one particular vehicle, thinking it's the only type of vehicle that exists? And I'm just saying, we've got to rethink these spaces, these models of how we want to engage and what we're actually offering. Sorry, Greg.
Oh, no. So you just reminded me, because I recently did some research, on some statistics related to how are we doing in advancing the Great Commission, finishing the Great Commission that Jesus gave us. And some of the statistics in America are really kind of staggering, that out of the Christian income is like $442 trillion, but Christian giving is only $700 billion. And 96% of that giving goes to pay for church staff and buildings. And less than 1% of that money is going to reach the people that have never heard of Jesus. And so there's some major issues. There's some kind of some sad news when it comes to advancing the gospel. And like you said, if we could think outside the box, and instead of and create missional businesses, first of all, that's where the lost people are. That's where the people who need Jesus are. So often the church, all we do is we're we're focused on believers, and we actually kind of do them a disservice because we create a holy huddle. We actually take them away from their relationships with non-Christians and pull them into church meetings. And instead of equipping them, like Ephesians 4:12 says, equipping the saints to do the work of the ministry, instead of sending them out in the missional community. So I really appreciate what you shared there.
Yeah, I don't know where I read about
it.
Most.
Can you tell everybody just real quick, what is the name of your coffee shop and why do you call it that?
So the shop is actually, I mean, it's not mine. There's 4 of us involved. Three friends of mine who, again, it was really both. We all met in church. Gregor, who's the youngest, he's 20 years younger than me. He was a kid I used to mentor through church, and then never thought he would be a business partner, but he became a business partner. And Derek and Alan, two people who were ministers, who were part of the Nazarene Church, who come out to do, who come out to do this ministry. So the 4 of us really were the founders, and then there's been so many others that sort of joined the story. And part of it was, so it's called Blend, and if you're looking for it, blendcoffee.co.uk is a website. Go check us out, and sort of Facebook. You'll see our culture. And Blend actually is an acronym, which was our values. We talked about to bless, to listen, to eat, to nurture, and to dare. And I'll say dare again because people always hear death or something. It isn't death, it's dare, as in dare to be Daniel, And those 5 things actually form our core values of our company. It's what we train our staff on. It's what we, and all of them are linked, sort of biblically, So how do you bless? How do you listen? How do you eat sacred? How do you nurture, which is a longer journey? And how do you dare? How do you keep pulling yourself out of comfortable spaces? And that, I love it because it means that we didn't create a corporate document after our business to create a values or a mission statement. And it was just built in, and it's there every day. And so what it does allow us is it allows both our Christian employees and our non-Christian employees to find a common place to believe in and work into. You don't have to be Christian to where we come under normal workplace rules, etc. So there's no restrictions that way. And from my point of view, that's what I realized. Like the coffee shop, if you see it, isn't Bible verses on the wall, and it isn't Christian music playing. It isn't that sort of coffee shop. We're not trying. There's plenty of good ones like that. We just weren't trying to be that. What we wanted to be is give people a kingdom experience. A place that people can belong before they believe. A place that is what we've realized in the 10 years we've been open is we have become a critical safe space in a community. And actually, one of the biggest losses in our community is being the safe spaces. It's been in this culture in Britain, the pub was the safest room. You walked into a strange town, you went towards the noise, you found the one with the lantern, and you walked into a warm place where food and safety was given for the evening. We've lost that campfire, that nomadic corral space and I use this language because hopefully it resonates with people, because people will realize that that's what they've been looking for, because and the church used to be that, it used to be that safe space. You could walk into any town, any community, walk in, and we as Christians sort of do that. We naturally go into church, find our local church, and we worship there as strangers. Whereas actually as a society, we've lost so much of that. And we've realized that the coffee shop, it's not been about, we're a people business that use coffee as the mechanism. And when we look at people and their lives and what they share and how they begin to use the space we've created, and the space becomes really versatile. We've had salsa dancing, we've had we've had 2 weddings in our coffee shops. We've had, I still want to get someone to do a sword fight one day. We've had we've had art clubs. We've had death cafe, menopause cafe. We've had, so the community starts using us for their
open mic nights.
Yeah, and
Open mic night.
Open mic nights. So it's more than just. That's what I say. As we call it, coffee lounge. One of our key design themes in the whole thing was about how do you create a living room for the village. How that is the community space that when people come in, they are comfortable, that they come and do their thing. And what underlying it from my point of view is another critical part of my theology, which is the incarnational Christ, the active Christ in our community, the Jesus of the neighborhood. And that has been so freeing to me, because I'm actually not trying to convince people to become Christian. I'm not, my father didn't, and I realize I don't. What I do want them to do is to have that experience, to make that choice. And that's like because even when we get into the nuance of it, and this is where thinking out of the box can be dangerous, is because we still want them to come back into the box. We only think of the out of the box to come back in. And that's the danger. We've got to be, what if Jesus isn't asking anyone to come back to the box? He's in the incarnate space out there in the community. And that's the beauty of what we've discovered.
Yeah. Some quick just questions for clarification. So how many locations do you have, and how many employees? And then are your main employees, like your main managers, are they Christ followers, or like, I'm sure some of the people that work there are not, but how would you describe that aspect?
It's evolved. So we have surely we have 7 outlets right now. We were just about to get to an 8th. And we're a tiny company. We're nobodies, We are not a Starbucks. We are not anything on that scale, and neither do we want to be either. I mean, our growth plan is not a franchise model; it's an organic model. So we train our staff to either run one or own one. We really believe that, saying you can only share what you experience yourself. So that's how we've been growing. We've been waiting for someone to be ready, and then we've gone, okay, right. here's a potential location. Let's see. And we began COVID with 3 shops and have come out with 8 shops. And that's been an interesting journey for us, to pivot, to change, to realize that people aren't in towns anymore. They are walking their dogs up a hill. They are in remote working spaces. We've looked at partnerships with other, we've just gone into a school and running the cafe. We've gone into universities. We've gone into, we don't want to be in churches. So we've looked at a church car park and put a shipping container in one of them. So that's been our growth, and we're about 60 employees. So we're not across the sites because we're small ventures. We keep it small. When we began, we probably had more Christians. It's been hard to find Christians who get this. I think it's just, again, and I tell pastors that I come across that for me, I'm like, please just equip the saints, create the theology. You don't have to do the coffee shop yourself. You don't have to create the cool, sexy, whatever. Just give people the space to grow into that and let God do the rest. And I think there is a real need, and I think it's so tough being a pastor in this day and age if you're trying to maintain that ownership. And there's so I really bless you guys and girls out there doing that. But I think your key role is to equip the saints, create the theology for guys to say, look, go and do it.
Sundeep, how do you use this platform to impact either the employees or your customers for the sake of Christ? Like, what is your goal there? Obviously, it's a slow burn. They're not coming in to hear a sermon. So how do you show them and model the love of Christ to folks, whether employees or customers?
It's like if I call it ministry, that's a loaded word. and I feel guilty for saying it, because again, my own theology says like I'm not worthy, I'm not theologically trained, I've not been to seminary, I'm not whatever. So I'm like, oh, that's, and it's so wrong, It's but my life is, my ministry, that I see it as just, it's pouring myself into the lives of my staff, not my customer. It's each one of us. It's been amazing. Every one of them that I've prayed for, looked after, engaged with, they are my mission. Like, my staff will meet my customers and they will share that, and my staff have been amazing. The things they have done for customers has been phenomenal. And I'll share a couple of stories about that without names, but I find with my staff, what has been amazing, the revelation is about the generational curses that are sitting in people's lives. That they are alcoholic because their parents were alcoholic, because their grandparents were alcoholic, because of a coal mine shutting 60 years ago. There's legacies in people's lives that you're trying to simply go in and break chains. It's not pew filling and baptisms. It's simply going in salt and light. It's softening ground. And that's the way. So I don't have any pressure, because I'm not trying to get them converted as my justification for ministry. I'm just saying, God, you put this person in front of me. What are they needing, and how can I provide that? And so it doesn't necessarily sit tidily with everyone, and plenty of, I can sit and talk to different people about, because some people want that conviction point, and they want the confession, and they want, and that's okay. I mean, I don't feel that pressure to do that. What I am doing is, like I said, it's that generate. So I'm trying to break the chains and soften the ground for the future. So talk about orchard planting, it's like, I'm planting seeds now for wherever fruit, whoever may take it on. And what I've realized is, actually, I'm probably, in so many cases, the first Christian they've ever met. The first actual Christian they've actually come across. And I don't have to be obtuse or obvious about it. I've just got to be who I am. And that's the spaces that I feel comfortable with. It's not pressured. It's not trying to get people to something, not making projects out of people. It's simply loving people.
Do they see you almost like a burning bush? Like when they get to know you, they're like, you're different. You're not like rigid or like rule follower. You're not the kind of Christian that I pictured. Do they kind of?
I mean, it's unfair in the sense, it's easy for me in the sense that most people think I'm Muslim. I'm a bearded brown man, So they have some expectation of me. So I exploit that to the extent that, well, if people have already got an idea of who I am, I might as well clarify it to them, and that's and sometimes that's actually, it's not just unique to me. I think being the outsider helps you. It allows. I think that is one of these ins we get in to be in people's lives. But actually, the bigger thing is the authenticity. It's being able to see people, because and that's what I'm saying about the incarnational. If I feel I'm genuinely coming across Christ today, I'm excited, because the forms that Christ appears in are very strange. Are very strange. And if that is the prisoner and the leper and the widower that Christ is talking about, then I'm like, this is who I'm actually meeting. This is literally revelation. This is actually, it's not that I'm giving something to someone. Actually, I'm being offered something. And that is how I'm growing. Like Jesus, God knows exactly what he's doing and how he's going to do it. We don't need strategy and whatever. We just need to be in love with him and find him every time we come across him, and just realize him. So I find that when I've been able to take the long journey with people, like, there are staff that I've sacked who are still in my life, who come for advice, who still want, because it wasn't about an employment relationship. It was me loving them, and some of them never been loved before. It's me being convicted the other way around as well, by seeing people follow Christ who are gay, who are still struggling with whatever alcoholism, so who are still in fringe in Christendom, etc., but who love Jesus, and that stretches me. And I'm trying to have to understand that and be convicted of things and realize, well, okay, this is part of I'm not all resolved trying to give someone, some lovely tidy thing. I'm actually in the wrestling space myself, discovering where God is really taking us, the deeper, the longer, the uglier, the dirtier, messier spaces, that He's calling us into. And I think I just love that there is this vehicle that can do it. I like in our Dundee shop, one of the most beautiful things our staff did post-COVID is they did a memorial for customers we lost during COVID, and through suicide in particular. Sorry, that's a trigger word, but people who took their lives during that period, and it was so beautiful for them to come up with the idea and then create the event, and to have all these loosely connected friends of these people have a place to process grief. And I'm like, who's even coming close to those? If I gave that to a church, it would become a big poster boy thing. Like it'd have to be a big event, whereas it was just a simple thing, a simple act.
That's really cool. I want to see if I can tie something in that you said earlier. You talked about how your parents really ministered to the lepers and people with leprosy. And you talked about how leprosy, most people, we shouldn't be scared of lepers, but we are. There's like real fear. Yeah. I wonder, have you seen, like with the pandemic, it's like we're living through the same type of thing. People were scared to touch another person because they didn't want to get sick. And do you see that same kind of mental stress and that same kind of, we're kind of like living through a time where almost everybody has been seen as a leper to some extent.
I didn't think it took COVID to do that. I think COVID just revealed all this stuff. I think the leper issue was there long before COVID. That's a good friend of mine who saw us in the shop. He said, and he knew my parents. He said, your father helped the lepers and the blind in India, and you've come to help the lepers and the blind in the UK. It's the same approach, the same gospel, the same solution is in both cultures. That here it's just more obtuse. It's not as obvious that people are lepers, that they are diseased, and they are lonely, they are grieving, they are isolated, they are living, they're suffering in traumas, that they're crying out for the gospel, but we've sanitized it in rooms into literature and words instead of actions and love. We've just created real, and it's there to be absorbed. And COVID, I think, has just made it much worse. Like, we've realized how many people have disappeared, and we're trying to find means of how do we reconnect and bring again a new memory. And that's what we were briefly talking before the show about. If people are just thinking, oh, I'm great, I'm at work, and I'm at home doing work, I'm not commuting, and look how great my life is. I'm saying, like, there's a price we're going to pay for that as well, because there is a need for social interactions. There is a need to get annoyed in traffic. There is a need to leave a space and go and do a day's work and meet with strangers and interact with people you don't like, and there's so many other skills and receptors that get triggered by those acts, and that's why, like, church, I think culturally the COVID revealed something very obvious in church, which is we have for years been talking about community and fellowship, and this is the ecclesia, this is what the church is. And yet, as soon as COVID happened, within a breath, within an instant, a lightning strike moment, we went online. it didn't affect us at all. We could go and flick a switch and jump online, and suddenly I'm sitting in bed eating toast, watching the sermon and the music fed to me. And it actually wasn't any different from me sitting in a pew watching the back of someone's head being in that room anyway. We shot ourselves in the foot by saying, actually, most of what we do is content. That's what, we spend most of our Christian resource on Christians, giving them content, convincing them to remain Christian. And I'm like, guys, somewhere someone's got to wake up and go, right, now we're complaining, then they're not coming back or they're whatever. And I think it just accelerated an obvious thing that was sitting in our institutional church culture. And I'm just desperate. So now, so much more, my mantra nowadays is just, we need connection, not content. If we literally cleared the board and said, come and let's have coffee, let's break bread together, let us go for a walk, let's go golfing if that's what we need to do. Connect. That then becomes ecclesia and the fellowship of believers. The content, there's plenty of content. My goodness, I can sermon surf and listen to any worship. There's enough. We don't have to compete with them. We like, even if someone's listening to this podcast and if this is their church or whatever, I'm like, fine, don't be content with this. Go now and phone a friend you haven't seen for a while and go have breakfast with them or lunch or whatever. Eat, to make a sacred act of, just being with people again. And I think that's where pastors, like, it's, if we come away and for coffee, that's what we realized, that even with the coffee, even in the business, and my numbers were down and we were locked and coffee shops were shut and office workers haven't gone back to work, and it's crippling. But as a business, we looked at it again saying, actually, they're not in town, so where are they? And they were out walking their dogs in the hills. So we said, right, let's buy a van, let's get a horse box, let's get a shipping container, and let's go and serve them coffee there. Let's go find a venue in the school. And as a business, it allowed us to pivot the same gospel and same theme in new spaces without being stuck to a physical shop. And I think in a church sense, we got stuck in this physical shop.
I think a long time you talked about the incarnational approach, that how Christ, the word became flesh, is what we read in John chapter 1, that God came into our world. The word incarnate, in flesh, it means in meat, that he became one of us. I think the Message translation says that he moved into the neighborhood. And Sundeep, but I know you well enough to know that what you're talking about is we've built in the Christian world a fortress mentality, and we'll lower the drawbridge when people come. And when they come in, we do a good job. We care for them and we try to feed them or do what we can for them. We're relational, but incarnational is a whole step beyond relational. It is, I'm not going to wait for you to come into my world. I'm going to go into your world. I'm going to learn your name. I'm going to find out what you're interested in. Yeah. I want to care for you. And as we do that, we're finding that people respond because they, and it's so funny because so many of the people from this generation don't, they really don't want to have conversations. We feel in so many ways that to the Christian faith, that this idea of being open to everything has closed them off to some things. But the one thing I would say to that is when you show love and concern and care, when you get to know the name of the person who comes into your coffee shop, one of the things I know that Sundeep, you used to try to do is when someone would come in, you would use their name when they walked in the door and when they left.
Yep.
Thank them for coming. And I thought, for someone to know that person's name, to take an interest in that person, you really are the place that they're going to go to for community. And how great is it to know that the person who's there is a follower of Jesus Christ and they love Christ. So I've walked into your shop and seen the same people sitting in a corner, reading their newspaper, drinking their coffee, Yeah. And I just think that incarnational approach is so huge.
It's powerful even for us, Randy. Like that's the thing I've found, that I'm not doing this because of my virtue. Ask my wife. I'm not a decent dude. I am not some virtuous sort of person who's got everything together, sitting here outputting my grace onto this community. I'm not. I'm part of the wrestle. What drives me is that this customer isn't someone I'm offering something to. I'm actually seeking Christ in them. I'm seeing them as Christ walking in to my coffee shop. I'm serving them in whatever form it's manifest, to say, how can I love you? Because that's what Christ, and that drives my faith. That keeps things alive. It keeps my, when I say, a year ago, it was quite humbling to have, your ego crushed with all your missional aspirations locked away in furlough with nothing to do. That was good. But when you hold it loosely, it didn't worry, because I was like, he gives and takes away. So whereas now coming back, it was exciting. It's like, okay, where else can I find Jesus? Not where else can I get a customer to come and buy my coffee? It's like, how do I seek the incarnate God in these spaces?
I'm thinking for us in Gospel Addict, like for those people listening and are thinking the gospel changes our lives, that we need God's grace every day. But for us, I love Matthew 4:19. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. And I know he spoke that to some disciples who were fishermen at the time, but he's speaking it to us today. And I think what he's telling us is, get out of where you're comfortable, get out of where you're known, and go to places for the sake of knowing others, of being Christ. We're called to be the aroma of Christ, to be the salt, the light, the leaven. Jesus used that illustration in so many ways. And I think for us, if each one of us as followers of Christ would go in and learn the name and begin to pray for somebody and begin to ask God to give me opportunities to love them and share Christ with them. You talked about the Celtic view of evangelism. There's a great book called that, The Celtic View of Evangelism. And I'll tell you, it's great, but the idea is that it's not a one-time transaction. It's something that it's a slow burn. It's a slow burn. So, well, I think we're running out of time. Greg, is there anything else you wanted to ask Sundeep?
I do want to, forgive me, I don't mean to offend you by this question, but do you wear a beard on purpose? Is that purposeful, or is it just a preference?
It's my wife likes it. That is the sole reason. That's it. She likes it. It's on.
That's a good reason. I appreciate that.
One of my jokes, Greg, is that every time I see Sundeep, he looks different. He's got short hair, long hair, beard, mustache, no beard, no mustache. And it's almost like, gosh.
I really don't like my face, or I'm hiding from Interpol or the CIA. That's it.
That's funny.
I'm in disguise. Was my.
That's funny. Hey, you said a lot of things that I appreciate, and I think our listeners are going to really appreciate as well, because I think one of the big mistakes in America that we've made is that we franchise the church.
Yeah.
We, instead of letting it grow organically through the Holy Spirit's leading, we've essentially used our entrepreneurial minds, and we've just figured out ways to market the church we don't even need the Holy Spirit. And I think it's a huge mistake. So I really appreciate, even like you in business, you're saying, hey, I want to grow my business not by franchising, I want to grow it organically. So I really appreciate that.
We use a phrase called human wealth. what is the human wealth of our business, not the financial wealth, and we've just coined this because I've said that is the real impact of what we're doing. That's both as a kingdom and so one of the things that I'm so conscious, like I realize that because I've grown up in the East and now live in the West, that you get to view both worlds, and here everything has become industrial. Everything, relationships, contracts, we've become an industrial way of looking at everything. So even when you look at the gospel, it's something we want to sell. We want something, I want to buy it. We subliminally go into those spaces. We don't realize, we want the next book that's going to tell us the next method of doing whatever, the sale of this, what's working there. How can we adapt that to work here? And we realize that we've become conditioned by the culture we live. Of course we have, I listened to the Holy Post, and Sky Jatani talks about the evangelical industrial complex. It's become an industry. It's become a corporation, and so I recently I was talking to people about how this whole phenomenon of people deconstructing their faith, etc. But it's just really interesting when you go into the deconstruction. They're not deconstructing their love of Jesus. They're deconstructing their experience of the institutional church. They're just trying to figure out, saying, hang on, what the heck am I doing in this thing process to try get to, and do I really need to do this? And I think one of the richest things to do is to realize the stories that are happening around the world, the stories that Christ is, the Holy Spirit, the fastest growing church right now is in Iran, in the world. In places of restriction, there is growth. So we don't have to come up with the next method, or let's do another coffee shop, let's do another, it's about us falling in love with Jesus and not him telling us to do something and us doing that, whatever that thing is. And if we can pull away from our own success and wealth and privilege and cultural framing that's sort of driving so many of our choices, and fall in love with Jesus again, like really come into those spaces of intimacy with him, the presence of Christ, and understand that journey, then this pressure of growth and expansion and relevance and protecting our institution, it goes away, because it's not yours to bother about. It's a Christ who knows exactly how this kingdom will be established, and he's needing us to follow him into those spaces. And I just think that it isn't, we can so easily build ourselves into doom and gloom right now, because we are in a big culture. There is a flux point happening in culture, and we haven't found our feet right now. We're drowning and treading water, and we're seeing things go up. But the Spirit of God is moving, and the Spirit of God is doing so many amazing things. And when I look at my business, my business can easily collapse tomorrow. COVID proved how fragile it was. But I'm still in love with Jesus. and I'm getting to meet the people he puts in my life. Like, us three would have never met without the kingdom of God. And here we are having this conversation. I'm like, this is delight. This is gift. This is the journey God is trying to. This is the fellowship that God that I think heaven will be like. The harmony of believers. And I'm like, how do we even come close to experience that? How often are we actually breaking bread with people, going into people's homes, coming into those spaces of just being in love, and it's not, it sounds so it's countercultural, because everything in the industrial language is growth and purpose and efficiency and and numbers and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, no, let's come back to the sit at his feet space.
Amen.
Yeah. So hey, thank you so much for giving us this time. And you reminded me of a quote, one of my favorite quote. Well, I have a lot of favorite quotes, but is that quote from that movie, It's a Wonderful Life, where Clarence leaves a book for the main character, and in it, there's a quote and it says, "No man is a failure who has friends." And I think one of the things that kind of stands out with all the things that you were saying is how relationships are really where the wealth is. Like, money is, you can have a lot of money, but if you can't trust anybody, if you don't have real relationships, you could be the loneliest guy in the world. But I love that quote, "No man is a failure who has friends." And I think what you're doing with your coffee shop is you're creating a context where you can develop sincere friendships with people, regardless of what their beliefs are or their backgrounds or who they are. And I think that's so cool. And I just want to close with another quote from a friend of mine who's now with the Lord, Jerry Bridges. I had the opportunity to be his friend and to get to know him. And he's written a lot of books on the subject of grace. And I love this quote from one of his books. He says, on our best days, we're never beyond the need of God's grace. And on our worst days, we're never beyond the reach of God's grace. And that's why the Gospel Addict podcast exists, because we need grace on our best days and on our worst days. So thank you for listening to the Gospel Addict. Hope you stay tuned. And thank you, Sundeep, for giving us your time. Is there anything else, Randy, you would like to share?
No, it's such a delight in my life. I have friends in Scotland and friends in different places of the world. But as Sundeep said, that's the beauty of God's kingdom. And so anyways, Sundeep, I'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Greg, hurry back, come back. And see
it's so cool because the reason I got to meet you, Sundeep, is because of Randy. And Randy is somebody that, I've probably heard Randy's name for like 30 years. We have so many mutual friends, but we just never connected until he joined the Navigators. And, it's just so fun because when he joined the Navigators, he invited me up to Scotland. And so I've been in your house, which it's just so cool how God, it's that organic nature of relationships. And so it's been fun. Randy's becoming a close friend, and it's been fun hanging out with him and serving the Lord together. And that journey took me to Scotland, and maybe it'll take me back sometime. But appreciate what you're doing there, and we will continue to pray for you as we think about what how you're advancing the kingdom of God there. So thanks for being a part of the show, and we'll hopefully connect again soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.